Hey YouTube, Bob here. Just wanted to show you one of the books that I knocked off my shelf back in early February 2013. It's now late February 2013, so I've had a couple weeks to look at it. But this is The Legend of Zelda Hyrule Historia. And this is a book that was first published in Japan last year in 2012 and was brought to the United States by Dark Horse. And just as an overview is written on the back cover here, I'll read that to you. The Legend of Zelda franchise has set the industry standard for riveting gameplay and immersive storylines. With each game, players have discovered a story of destinies intertwined and heroes emerging from humble beginnings to overcome the most impossible of odds. Now, Dark Horse Books and Nintendo invite you to take an in-depth look at the creation of one of the most beloved gaming franchises of all time. Containing never-before-seen concept art, character designs, the official chronology of the games, the history of Hyrule, and much more, The Legend of Zelda Hyrule Historia brings an unprecedented look into the making of the Legend of Zelda series. So this game is fully endorsed by Nintendo, although something that's curious I've noticed is that there is no Nintendo seal of quality anywhere to be found. I've always been amazed throughout the years about how strict Nintendo was about putting their seal on the products, even if they were created by a second party or whatever the case may be. But this book does not have the seal of quality, but is definitely still endorsed by Nintendo. And there was a huge buzz of excitement about this book when it was first announced in Japan, because never before had Nintendo issued any sort of statement about an official chronology or timeline of the Legend of Zelda games. And this book was the first to do that. So, just at a first glance, the book has a very nice aesthetic. It's kind of an emerald green color with gold foil printing on the front cover and on the spine as well. You got the Master Sword, Hyrule Historia, and you already saw the back. Definitely endorsed by Nintendo, but no seal of quality. The only thing that's a little disappointing about the physical feel of the book is that it's a little bit flimsy. It is a hardcover book, but the cover isn't the sturdiest of cardboard, as it is a little bit flexible. But it's not like anybody does this with books normally. But anyway, it does have a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe an inexpensive feel to it. But it's still nice nonetheless. The pages are made out of a nice thick stock. They are matte finished. And it looks like they make good use of the page real estate so far, from what I've seen of the book. So it opens with a little excerpt here about, by Shigeru Miyamoto, his comments on the 25th anniversary of The Legend of Zelda, which was one of the main reasons why this book was published at the time that it was. And it gives Miyamoto's Hyrule Historia, which basically says what his role was. Let's see if I can get this here. There we go. What his role was in the making of each Legend of Zelda game. And you can see for the most part he was the producer or director, right on the right hand side there of all that text. But it gives the year, the title, and his role, which I thought was pretty neat. So that's an opening to the book. Here are the table of contents. Now this is where things get a little bit interesting, and it's nice the way they've done this, but to be honest, it wasn't really what I was expecting out of this book, but I'll get into that a little bit later on. It says The Legend of Zelda begins, the world of Skyward Sword, history of Hyrule, a chronology, and then creative footprints documenting 25 years of artwork. So as you can see overall, the book is divided into thirds, and if you take a look at the spine, you can see basically about how much of each part of the book is dedicated to each segment. So this first part is all about Skyward Sword. This next part is about the history, including the chronology and timeline that everybody was so interested in. And then the last third is basically concept art and any other type of artistic, drawing or anything that was developed for every game. So we take a look at the first page of The Legend of Zelda Begins, the world of Skyward Sword. Got the beautiful Skyward Sword watercolor art. And it basically just goes into extreme detail about all of the characters, the locations, the species, and the storyline of Skyward Sword, which I am finding to be very interesting. Of course, I haven't been able to read through all of this yet, but I plan to as time goes on. So that's pretty much the first third of the book is all about Skyward Sword. And while that's neat, to me, personally, that isn't what I was really expecting from this book. But that's what you get. The second third of the book, if we open by the different color pages here, The History of Hyrule, a Chronology. And this is what everybody was so excited about with this book. A Chronology of Hyrule, Land of the Gods. History of the cycle and rebirth of the Triforce. And of course it's going to go through each game. It gives you a little overview of how to read the chronicles. How on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of each page there is a little segment of the timeline telling you the era, the chapter, and unknown details between the eras. And here, this is the general timeline. Legend of Zelda, goddesses and the hero, creation, and it continues on through the different eras. And then if you've been following the Legend of Zelda timeline for any length of time, you notice that most people go by a split timeline theory. And this details all that and how each game plays into the timeline as it unfolds. And one of the more curious things, as you'll notice here, the very first two games in the series, Legend of Zelda and The Adventure of Link, in one of the most popular timeline theories, they're the last games in the series, which I think is kind of a neat idea. But anyway, the rest of this chapter of the book goes on to detail each game and the story behind it and how that plays into the overall timeline. Of course, giving screenshots and art of each of the games to help depict the storyline as it goes on. And speaking of art, that's what the last third of the book and the biggest chapter is dedicated to, is concept art and art they used in all of the games. Creative footprints, documenting 25 years of artwork. And while I think concept art is certainly neat, especially with the very first games, about how the maps were laid out, how they were going to divide the overworld up into its grid, labyrinth designs, character designs, and I love the art of the first Legend of Zelda game. So while all of the art and concept art is very neat, it wasn't really what I was expecting out of this book. I was expecting it to be a chronology, like everyone else was, because that's what they said that it would be. And I was hoping that it would give, for the most part, each game an equal segment or chapter in the book as it goes through the timeline and explains how that game's story plays into the timeline. But that isn't what we get. This game seems to focus mainly on art and Skyward Sword. And then with a fairly large part in the middle about the timeline, which is what everybody was looking for. So while it isn't evenly divided up in between, showing each game and how it played into the timeline, it does have a fair amount of, representation of each game and how it does fit into the story. But the art is very beautiful and very interesting to see for each game. It's definitely a book that you cannot get the full experience of just sitting down, at one time through. And the very last thing in this book I think is one of the coolest things, and I haven't even taken an in-depth look at it yet. It's a special comic, manga style, and it specifies everywhere this story reads from back to front. So if we go back to this part of the book here, you'll see at the very end, here is the manga comic. Message from the author. And it's an original story. And it starts out in beautiful color. And then after the first few pages, goes to black and white. But since this is towards the end of the book, this is something I haven't had a chance to take an in-depth look at yet. But it is definitely a treat and one of the neatest things that was included in this book. So anyway, that's Legend of Zelda Hyrule Historia. I believe it's still for sale on Amazon.com or possibly Barnes & Noble. And it's a fairly inexpensive book. It only costs, $20, $25. And I think that's a terrific price for the content and for the quality of what you get.